My grandfather, my dad's dad,
Gran came over.
I was very close to.
Jamaican born.
I used to take him shopping every Friday.
Came over.
And then the deal was that he'd then take me for a couple of pints afterwards.
I want to say probably the 50s.
Welcome back to No Ordinary Life, where ordinary people like Gavin,
Okay.
Julie, Anne, Andy,
Push that back.
April,
Okay.
Susanna,
It's really funny.
Spencer, Sarah, and B
I'm just painting pictures.
talk about their extraordinary lives.
Do I remember my grandparents? Yes, I do.
I remember
I loved my grandparents very much.
2 grandmothers.
I grew up with both sides of my grandparents.
I remember them very clearly because
They were quite elderly,
Spending weekends over there.
old-fashioned, obviously.
My mum's side, my nan would always come down.
when we were at the orphanage, we were allowed home for holidays
Sort of ordinary, hard-working families.
and we always went to our grandparents who lived in Berkshire.
Fill out chocolate sweet drawer with Mars bars and penguins and things like that.
Leave a comment below.
So very close family.
My granny was a lovely lady.
My mum's mum was a stay-at-home mum,
My grandfather was,
and my granddad also was an electrician.
during the war,
Dad's parents, my dad's mum
or before First World War really,
had quite a few jobs. She was a nanny.
he was with
She worked in a elderly care home,
laying the communication lines all around the world.
and her husband was a DJ in a nightclub.
I can't remember the name of the company now.
They grew up here.
He travelled extensively. My mother was born in Egypt.
Like my dad's parents were born in another country,
Consequently, because he was overseas all the time when they were of a certain age,
and my mum's dad was born in another country, but my mum's mum was born here in England.
my mother and her sister were sent back to England to boarding school.
I do remember my grandparents.
My dad's mum and dad, both Jamaican.
My grandma and granddad on my father's side,
My gran came over.
we were very close to.
Jamaican born.
They were the sort of people that you could just turn up at any time
Came over, I want to say probably the 50s,
and you would always be welcome.
early 40s, 50s.
They'd always say that we loved eggs
My grandfather retired
because they gave us no other option.
very early, really.
It was either fried egg,
He and my grandmother came back to England.
scrambled egg,
They taught us a lot.
or poached egg.
My grandmother taught us cooking,
Mine favourite was poached, actually, but
although she did have a maid
actually we would have much preferred some bacon with it, for example,
and a gardener, but we used to work in the garden.
instead of spam.
She also told us many, many tales. She wrote beautiful stories for us as children.
But yeah, they were lovely people.
My grandfather was very much the old school.
So my grandfather, my dad's dad,
No talking at table. We had to lie down for an hour after your meal.
I was very close to. So I used to take him shopping every Friday,
We went to bed 6:30.
especially when my grandma couldn't really go out anymore because she got dementia.
Very, very strict.
So I'd go and spend time with my granddad, take him shopping.
If you had your elbows on the table, he'd whack you with a knife.
And then the deal was that he'd then take me for a couple of pints afterwards.
But it didn't do us any harm. He also taught us how to play chess.
Every Friday afternoon, we'd run round the shop in about 10 minutes and then straight to the Wetherspoons,
How to make hammocks, how to make rugs.
have a couple of pints.
Also filled us in with lots of information about the world as it was in those days.
And my grandfather used to open up to me quite a lot.
So we're very, very grateful to our grandparents, more so than most probably.
And he did tell me several stories about the war.
Stay tuned.
My grandma make Thai dessert.
Let me see.
And underwent electrotherapy.
She make it from start with the rice and then to grind it.
He was a miner. He was scalped down the mine.
No, sir.
And the spit would bubble on the hot coals, and I can remember being fascinated.
The conversation continues.
The only grandparent I remember is my mum's mum.
Let me see.
She lived with us for a good few years before she died.
Okay.
I think she died when I was 6.
Growing up, I never met my grandparents, but
She was wonderful. She was a midwife. She went to
no.
London. She went to London to become a nurse on the first day of the general strike in the 1920s.
No, sir.
She'd wanted to be a nurse for a long time, but her father wouldn't let her. She was from the valleys in South Wales.
I don't remember my grandparents, though I do remember tales about them.
And he finally relented and let her go and study nursing.
When I did, it was very, very, very fleeting, and it was when I was very, very young.
He was a miner. He was scalped down the mine, and he was so happy with the care that the nurses had given him that he said he wanted her to go and be a nurse.
So I can't really tell you that much about my grandparents.
Do I remember my grandparents? I do.
And she was quite a formidable woman.
I met all 4 of my grandparents.
She went to the Royal Free Hospital to learn.
And met one great-grandparent as well.
Then became a midwife and a community nurse.
So I remember them all.
Ended up her career coming back to South Wales.
Dad's parents both died when I was in my teens.
She was a community nurse and midwife.
My nana and granddad separated again when I was young.
She was also someone who would walk around the woods on her own at night.
So didn't really spend much time with my grandfather.
And to go and deliver babies and see patients.
Spent a lot of time with my nana before she passed away.
Also, in her front room, she'd have a clinic.
Nana is still alive.
Very well known in the area.
And my granddad.
I remember her looking after me and my sister as children.
We called him Guggy.
Tell us your story below.
I had very good relationships with most of my grandparents.
Quite magical, yeah. She loved wrestling. She loved giant haystacks and all that.
My grandfather on my mother's side worked at a railway factory.
She used to make things quite magical for us and she looked after us. It was wonderful.
My gran, when she worked
Saturday night, and we'd have Saturday night TV.
Fabrics factory, darning socks.
Then we'd have, she'd get the good china out. She had...
Or making socks.
Ornaments. I remember having hundreds of Toby jugs around the house. She had a lot of stuff. My grandmother would have seen the birth of the NHS as a nurse and midwife.
I remember my my granddad, my grandma.
I don't know anything about that. Unfortunately, she died before I could ask her any of those questions.
From my mum's side, and my granddad and my grandma from my dad's side really well.
My memories of my grandparents are...
It was a good time.
Not great.
Yeah, it's always a happy time seeing them.
My father's mother died in childbirth.
My dad's side, they are farmer.
And as a result of that, my father's father...
They had a rice farm.
Asked 2 spinster sisters of his to raise my father.
Just go to rice farm every day.
So I didn't really know that grandfather.
My granddad have 4 horses.
Until much later in his life when he came to live with my parents.
So when I was young, I just remember going to their house.
He's effectively homeless and he turned up on our doorstep with 1 small bag.
Full of chickens and horses. And
grandmother, my mother's mother, insisted that they take him in and find room for him.
Catch up on our latest episodes and subscribe.
So at that point, we were living in the house with me.
It's just, so they don't really work for me to see either.
My cousin was living with us because she'd had to move out of her house during the war.
Sometimes they go to the farm.
Because they were overcrowded.
In the rice farm.
And then it was my mother's parents and my father's father living in the house.
But you don't really see their work when I was young because I'd just go in to see them sometime.
My grandfather on my mother's side was a coal miner.
Yeah, and my mom's side.
Whose health had been effectively destroyed by his work.
My grandma make Thai dessert.
So my abiding memory of him.
So she always smell of her,
is of him sat along by the fire.
what do you call that? Like powder, she ground the rice.
Coughing into a handkerchief, and then he'd have to clear his throat and he spit into the fire.
With I don't know what's that called.
Because his chest was destroyed by the dust.
When you make bread, for example, if you're going to make bread or rice.
And the spit would bubble on the hot coals, and I can remember being fascinated.
Rice, bun, or anything like that.
My grandmother was I think she was quite a cultured woman, but she was very sensitive.
She make it from start with the rice and then she grind it.
As they used to say then, she suffered with her nerves.
Put a little bit of water in that big...
and underwent electrotherapy.
Pressed.
This is in the late 50s.
Rock, like it looked like rock. It's heavy like rock, and she pressed it.
I don't think it would be allowed to happen now, and she died at the hospital. I remember that.
And it always smells sweet, and and I get to had her dessert, her sweet.
My father's father, who arrived on the scene much later.
And my granddad.
My abiding memory of him.
He
was that he turned the garden into a blaze of flowers. He was a really gifted gardener.
He's a carpenter.
And the garden became the sort of talk of the village.
Carpenter. So he carved as well, wood and stuff like that. And
He was also very kind.
Chair or...
To me, because he kept me well supplied with sweets.
And he builds his own house. Yeah, it was lovely.
So he was always in my good books.
Next time.
Earliest memory, I think, of TV programs probably was things like Watch with Mother.
Ren and Stimpy.
I like The Twilight Zone.
It was a mixture between like Transformers and Care Bears.
Why are things white men blacked up?
Andy Pandy and
Keenan and Kel.
Educating Archie and
Power Rangers.
I still listen to the Archers.
And I loved Tomorrow's World.
Discovered the Goon Show.
Benny Hill being chased off a cliff by naked women roller skating.
I'm going to touch a lot of people's souls with this one.
No Ordinary Life. Thank you for watching.
If you ask me if it's important to travel, I say it's important to see the world. Definitely physically. You can't do everything online.
Subscribe to keep the conversation going, and don't forget to ring the bell.